flight, we are go for launch. T minus 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Liftoff. This is Navigating AI, hosted by Rich Wilson, guiding business leaders through the new intelligence era. Let's explore how AI is reshaping business, leadership, and the world.
Hi, I'm Rich Wilson. Welcome to Navigating AI, where we guide business and HR leaders through the new intelligence era. Today's episode is titled Two States, One Standard, and we are joined by Wes Long Feather. He will share with us how he rebuilt the HR departments at Prairie Knights and Grand River. Wes is Vice President of Human Resources for Prairie Knights Casino and Resort in North Dakota and Grand River Casino and Resort in South Dakota. Wes is an operator. He's rebuilt HR systems across two properties, standardized benefits and practices, tightened accountability, and put structure behind training, performance, and workforce processes so the organization runs better and people actually stay. Wes is also a member of the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe. He chose a path that tribal members, especially tribal men, do not often choose in human resources. He returned home because he believed this work mattered for his people and his community. And since this is Navigating AI, we'll connect his story to practical AI, not hype, as a way to scale what already works. Wes, welcome to the show. So great to have you here, and it's very nice to see you again.
Hey, thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
All right, let's dive right in. So, for listeners who have never worked in gaming and hospitality, what does it actually mean week to week to be the VP of HR for two casino resorts in two different states? What do people outside this world misunderstand about the workforce realities you're dealing with?
Well, for one, okay, so a lot of people are from the outside don't realize that we're here to generate revenue for the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe, right? But there's ways you got to go about that. And when I was put in charge with two organizations, there was like two ships going in two different directions. And so what you need to do is make sure that they're both going in the same direction, right? And so being a vice president of human resources includes a lot of things, but just high level, you got your organizational cultures that you have to deal with. And there's two separate ones that we're trying to make the same. Through our strategic planning, one of the statements that came out, which is really awesome, is one culture, one team, one family. And that's where we're trying to head that direction, right? So we also have compliance, we have operations, we have employee relations, we have recruitment, retention, safety, compensation, training, budgets. All of those things need to be going in the same direction at the same time with both casinos. So that's what it partially means to be a VP of human resources.
All right. So before we get into the results, I want listeners to understand your story and what shaped how you lead. Give us the quick version of your path into HR and what shaped your leadership style. You shared something important about during our prep call. As a Standing Rock Sioux tribal member and as a tribal male, HR is not a path many people choose. What made you choose HR and what made you decide it mattered to come home and do this work with your people?
It's something that's instilled to us went from a very young age, right? Culture that you work towards helping your community become better, and whatever that means, everyone had their own role, in the community as far as what it takes to make the community run better. So from that perspective, I can go all the way back to when I was a child, and the things that I was taught then, that it leads you into the whole servant leadership conversation, right?
Okay.
And what that means, and you spend a lifetime learning what that actually means to put it into practice as you get older, which is kind of where we are now.
So you had mentioned to me that in other workplaces, you were told that you did not fit their mold for what they expected a Native American or even a professional to look like, even when the results were there. Without naming names, can you tell a story that captures what that
Sure.
felt like and how it shaped you?
I have a few actually, but one in particular was a uh, insurance company I worked for. Because I was a licensed producer at one time, I was put in charge as a manager for two offices in two different cities. And they were threatening to close those offices because they were underperforming, and the whole culture was just not very conducive to providing or producing results, right? And so I was put in charge of these two organizations. I walked in, didn't know what I was walking into. But, I go to work, they give me my marching orders, I walk into the building and, start introducing everybody or meeting everybody rather, learning the organization of that to part of that building because it was part of a much larger organization. So in the buildings that I was in, there might have been about 7 different departments, all working to do the same thing, or not the same thing, but for the same company. But they were at odds with each other, and I didn't realize that until I got to know everybody. It took me about 3 months to get everyone communicating and relating to each other and getting to know each other. And within 6 months, it was one of the highest performing um, offices in the state. So we turned that completely around. And then another one was when I was working for a city government, municipal government. Same thing happened there. Um, Safety was a big issue there. And so I ended up over a 4-year period saving them $500,000 in premiums and things like that, with the reduced costs of safety and all that, or safety accidents, everything. So in those two situations, those were two areas where I don't think I was expected to succeed as well as I did, but I did. And but what came down to was I don't know, it's hard for me to explain, because when they tell you you don't meet expectations, what does that mean? What are your expectations? Because you've got proven results, and so that I have a hard time with understanding still to this day what that exactly meant for me.
So when you originally shared this with me, you joked about possibly writing a book and titling it Does Not Meet Expectations.
Right.
So when you look back, what do you think was really happening in those moments? And what did you take from it that shows up in how you lead today?
I am a strong believer in compliance, a strong believer in your policies are there to protect you and protect your organization. And you're also employees always have rights. And so when you're in human resources, your job is to protect the organization, but not only that, protect your employees, so they're not being, so nothing's going on that could adversely impact them. And I also follow the rules. I don't bend the rules for anyone. And in a couple situations, that might have been the situation where I wouldn't bend a rule or I wouldn't look the other way. And that doesn't sit well with people. And when you become not as so much an obstacle, but and I was probably seen as an obstacle, but in my mind, I was protecting the organization.
I completely understand that. You've also talked about building a team that can run without you. What did you do to create real ownership and independence?
Okay, so here, for example, I have a wonderful team. I have a great team that I work with here at Prairie Knights and also at Grand River. But that didn't come overnight. That didn't just happen. They were great employees to begin with, but they all had more to give, and they all had more to offer. They all had more strengths that needed to be culminated. And so when I first come on board, I met with everyone individually, got to know their job descriptions, got to know them, got to know where they come from, their history, their background, but what they wanted out of their future in human resources. So keeping that in mind, I had to meet with everybody. Then I did their evaluations and got to talk about setting goals for everybody, introduce strategic planning to the department. I have a weekly staff meeting with everybody so they know what's going on. They know what my expectations are. So I'm not looking over anyone's shoulder at all because they know what their jobs are. They know what needs to get done to be successful. And then as we go through the strategic planning process, they understand that we're all kind of like when I work being a VP of HR for two organizations, they understand that human resources, we're all on the same page and we're all working towards the same goal, right? And so they know everyone in the department knows where we're going, and they know what the expectation is of human resources at both facilities. And so we've done enough strategic planning and enough staff meetings, their evaluations. They've had enough communications with me one on one that I can step back and just let them do their thing, right? Because they know how to do all of that now. So I always say to them, if I get hit by a bus, the department could run for 6 months to a year with with just them, because I have that much faith in their abilities. So, that's something that took a little bit of time, but with a little bit of effort and confidence in who you work with, and because I've learned as much from them as they've learned from me, because they all
Mhm.
came with their own experience and their own opinions. It's not me making the decisions now; it's us as a team. So yeah, they're all an important part of the team that it wouldn't function without each one of them.
That perspective is exactly what makes the rest of your story so practical. You've had to earn credibility through outcomes. So let's talk about what you standardized first and why. So when you stepped in, what were the first two or three things you knew had to be standardized across both Prairie Nights and Grand River?
Okay. One of the things I did first, and not to say anything against my predecessors, but I saw that we needed to build a stronger foundation, and your foundation is built on your policies, and your foundation is built on your compensation structure, and your foundation is built on your performance evaluation and your feedback with your employees. So those were three areas that we went to work on immediately to build that foundation. And now they're just standard practice for us, so that's kind of nice. But initially, those were the first three things that we did to strengthen that foundation for both casinos.
What is one practice you thought would work everywhere, but you had to localize it between the two properties?
One that jumps out at me is the leadership development for both entities. Because I worked here longer than I did down at the other casino, um, the training that we provided, the supervisor toolkits that we offered, the policy development that I did here first, um, they all were able to see firsthand how, the evaluation tool that was rewritten, the compensation structure that was redone. They saw here at Prairie Nights how successful that was. And then I had to introduce it down there later, and they weren't prepared for that because um, because they were doing what they were doing for so long, and they didn't have to be a part of a structure like that. They weren't used to a structure like that. And so our directors here are going along great, and now we can build on that. But versus down there, we're still working on that leadership development for the leadership team down there.
You've said that the goal is to get providers working for you, not the other way around. What does that look like in practice when you manage benefits, vendors, and expectations?
Sure. What that looks like here is that okay, so I've been here for almost 3 years, but when I first started, one of the first things I noticed is that with our benefits and our retirement, and I mean anything, even our property and casualty insurance on the other side of the house, that we were just signing our agreements every year, and we weren't concerned with the deliverables. Or that, I mean, I say we, but then I started reading the actual contracts and the agreements, and I find that we were not asking our broker, or any of our vendors, our brokers, our HRIS, our FSA, our workers' comp, to provide the deliverables that they promised us that we were paying them to do. And so each one of them I had a conversation with each one of them, and our 401k provider as well, and let them know that, look, I am about deliverables. I have a population here that I am responsible for. And, if you can't provide your deliverables, we can find somebody that can. So each one of those in those areas, we had to change a couple of things. We had to switch HRIS providers. We had to switch to a different FSA provider. We had to switch to another financial advisor with our 401k plan because of that. We weren't getting the deliverables, and they couldn't promise them, going forward. And so we just ended the relationship. So I'm about providing good service to our employees and organization, and so that's what that looks like, getting them to work for us versus us for them.
When you think about standardization, that's the foundation for automation and AI. What did you have to fix first so that the system could be AI ready down the road?
Um, okay, so as far as being AI ready, I mean, one of the first things we had to do was automate our, move to the same HRIS system. The human resource information system that we use now, Paycom, has standardized a lot of things for us, but we also had to do some strategic planning. So we're all going in the same direction. We had to update our compensation. We had to rewrite all our job descriptions to make them uniform. We had to do our performance management tool, which is going to be especially when we move to AI. That's one of the biggest ones that we're going to be relying on AI for is performance management. The other one is policy development. We had to create policies that work for both organizations, and that's also another AI function that in the future we're hoping to work on. And then the other one was training. Training was another one that we needed to standardize.
So I want to shift gears now. You mentioned annualized turnover was more than 100% at one point. In simple terms, that means you were replacing more people in a year than your average headcount.
Right.
When you saw turnover at that level, what was your reaction and what did you immediately suspect was driving it?
Well, like I said earlier, I understood what was driving it was that our foundation was weak. At the heart of your foundation is also your people, your employees, your staff. I mean, that if they don't feel like they're a part of the organization, they don't have the loyalty that you've expected from you would want from them, right? And if they don't feel like a valued part of this culture and this family or this team, they're okay leaving to go to another organization. So for example, the annualized turnover rate here, going back to 2017, was 116% annualized turnover. In 23, it was down at 100%. And as of last month, we're at 56.4%. So all of the things, that we've talked about thus far have impacted that turnover rate. And there's a long ways to go yet, but I mean, that's success as far as I'm concerned. If I left today, I left it better than when I got here. That's what they'll say.
So, looking back, Wes, what were the top three changes you feel mattered most in reducing that turnover?
Well, I like to say there was one, two, three things, but there's probably about 10 things that impacted that turnover because
Wow.
there's a lot of things that we did to make this a better place to work. And we put our employees back at the center of everything and built it around them.
Okay, well, then let's simplify it. Which change was the first one where you saw people stop quitting? What and what did you notice on the floor?
Well, there's 2 things because they go hand in hand. One of the
Okay.
things that we changed immediately was the, performance management tool that we were using, but that required us to change the compensation plan that we also had, the structure, because one was tied into the other, and once we
Hmm.
started doing that, where employees in the previous structure, they called it a skill block, and in the skill block structure, an employee would reach the top of their skill block and have to stay there. And you could reach it in 2 years, maybe 3, and you couldn't go any further. So, and the assessments they were getting were just that, were just check boxes that the supervisors were doing and weren't meeting with the employee at all. So there was a disconnect there where the supervisor is saying, "Okay, I did my job, I did the assessment, and I gave them an increase," and the employee wasn't a part of that process. And they found out that they had their assessment by looking at their paycheck and seeing that they got an increase, and there was a total breakdown in communication there. And so our new structure, our new tool requires at the 3 different levels that we have requires the supervisor to meet with the employee, um, and go over that whole evaluation, and they set goals together. And they set goals for the previous year. They talk about previous year's goals, but a lot of them didn't have any. And then they set goals for the next year. So we're seeing now that with the evaluations this year, they are talking about the goals they set previously, and did they reach those goals? And so that we're finally seeing the impact of that. And then when the skill blocks was the skill blocks was removed completely, an employee could earn more of an increase than what was allowed in that skill block before. So they were allowed to get a percentage increase versus a quarter or a 50-cent increase under the skill block.
What are you doing now to keep turnover trending down?
Okay, so one of the big things we did, of course, was our universal handbook that we made uniform across both organizations. That was approved in January of this year. We did a lot of training. That was one of the big things that we did was really bolstered our training program, and a lot of that comes from getting employee feedback and employee engagement because employees that hadn't been heard before, they weren't a part of this process before, and now they're at the center of it. They're the ones telling us what will make it a better place to work because we listened to them before. We continue to implement some of the things they've said before, but we're also listening to them about how things could get better. And they all have ideas. I mean, everybody comes here, like I said, with their own strengths, their own experience, and their own opinion. And so we're asking for that. We're asking for that feedback, and we rely heavily on it now.
If AI could help you reduce turnover further, where do you feel it would actually help most? Would it be spotting early warning signs, improving onboarding, manager coaching, schedule fairness, or something else?
Well, actually, all of those areas, because I talked earlier about the being AI ready.
The performance
And
evaluations you
right,
mentioned.
and if I could have an AI tool that would read those performance evaluations for me and pull out red flags for some of the things that employees would say, or that were said in those meetings, and say, okay, here's what you could set your goal on based off of this, because I read every single one of those evaluations that comes through. I mean, every single one, and we have 330 employees, and so I'm reading 329 of them because I'm not reading my own because I'm a part of it, but so I read all of them, and, and some of them I do offer advice. I'll send them back and say, "Hey, let's try this," or did you guys talk about that? Because that might help with this, kind of thing. Because we talk about their strengths, weaknesses, barriers to success, and we talk about changes that they could offer to job descriptions, all of those things that we want to get out of them. We talk about their communication, we talk about customer service, we talk about, innovation, communication. What are your initiatives you're taking? All those things that employee has to ask. The only thing we didn't include in this was the self-assessment. And I'd love to include a self-assessment tool as a part of this whole process, but we weren't ready for that yet here. And so I think in the next year, we'll be ready to implement the self-assessment because employees can now, they're part of this process. Now they can start to see, well, what can I do to impact what's happening here?
A lot of the same discipline that improves retention also shows up in workers' comp and incident handling. So
Oh,
let's
yeah.
pivot to that for a moment.
Okay.
What was broken in workers' comp reporting or injury handling when you arrived?
Oh, wow.
And what did you change first?
Day two here at Prairie Nights. That was one of the things I met with, I was meeting with all the staff here, but I asked about the workers' comp, and I asked for the data. I asked for the incident reports, and I asked for the claims. And then I wanted to, of course, meet with the vendor, but I found that our entire structure, our entire system for workers' compensation was severely broken. And what that means is that it wasn't being run properly. So, we were sending employees back to work injured, and we weren't, you know, it's a self-funded plan, and so it wasn't being primarily handled out of human resources, and finance saw that when you don't have a lot of claims, you get a refund back on your premium because being self-funded, they bill you for what the expectation is, and if you don't reach it, they'll refund you some of your premium, right? And so that was kind of guiding how human resources was run, and they were also allowing employees that got injured to sign a waiver saying, "I'm not injured, I'll go back to work." And so my second day of employment here, that went away. And it went into we went into complete trading mode on workers' compensation.
Okay. Walk us through your playbook then. Who did you train? What got standardized? And how did you get managers to follow it consistently?
Well, the human resource department wasn't completely in charge of workers' compensation when I started here. Although we had two employees that were working with it, they weren't completely in charge. And I found just by visiting them that they hadn't been trained properly. And so everything workers' compensation I brought back in-house. And I've run workers' compensation programs for other organizations successfully. And so I know what works, right? And so I trained the two human resource staff on the difference between an incident report and a first report of injury when it comes to claims and how to identify the difference between those. And all the reporting is really simple. So they made the process simple, was online. So we submit everything online for us, right? And then once they got trained and understood and they separate all their files correctly, then we went to work with the security department. And the security officers they do an incident report for any situation, whether it's employee or guest situations. They do all the reporting for that, but they next learn the process for the 401k processing and learning the difference between an incident and a claim. And so now we don't miss anything because our first responders are always the security officers here at Prairie Knights, and they've been trained properly, and so they are the ones responsible now. We don't do it anymore in human resources. It's done in the security department. Any reporting to workers' compensation or WSI here in North Dakota is done in through the security officers, where before they had no knowledge of how that even worked. And now our guys here just are they're kind of gatekeepers. They kind of keep an eye on what's going on. They offer advice whenever it's needed, because they know the program inside and out, right? And so they are able to be the resource now. It's not just me, it's the staff here in the human resources department that are the resources for the other departments now. And then in addition to that, we end up, of course, writing that ergonomic grant.
So that was, I guess, the big change then once it became a well-oiled machine.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yes.
If you had an AI quality control tool for incidents, what would you need it to do? Would it need to flag missing information, standardize narratives, reduce reporting errors, or help managers handle it correctly in the moment?
If we had an AI tool that could do that, because they explain the situation, and a lot of times when you read it, you're like, that was borderline a claim, and if we had a tool that could catch that immediately, say, wait a minute, you might want to submit a claim for this versus a potential claim, because if they get injured or this exacerbates into something different a day or two down the road and they need to go to the doctor, um, if we had a tool that could, say, hey, if you're using that language, this is probably going to be a claim. Because the first report will waive the as long as they get it in with 24, 48 hours, it'll waive the what they call it, a late fee, basically, or the deductible. And so we don't pay. We're at a point where we don't pay any of those late fees hardly at all anymore. Versus every single one was paper, and so it was submitted late, and so we had to pay a late fee on every single one of our claims. It's not the case any longer.
That's the same oversight mindset that shows up in benefit claims as well. So tell us the story of a claim or cost issue you question. What did you see? What did you challenge? And what happened?
Okay. Well, with insurance, like our workers' compensation is a self-funded plan. And
Mhm.
so our health plan, we are self-funded. And so with that, I am responsible to ensure that we're running our benefits properly. And so I review weekly the claims that come into to Prairie Knights. And as I review those, I did at one time in another life also process claims, insurance claims. And so I know what to look for when we get a bill. And so as I'm looking at these bills, or the invoice that came in, I'm looking at the date of service versus the date of the claim that it was processed and paid. There are some timely filing limits that you need to pay attention to a lot of times. And it's different everywhere you go. It's 90 days, 60 days, uh, 6 months to a year. And so I questioned a claim that came in it was almost a year old, almost a year to the day. The claim came in, it was a large dollar claim. And like I said, we're self-funded, so those things jump out at me, especially because we have to pay for that. Of course, we have stop loss too. But so I questioned the claim. I sent it back to the provider, and I said, "Does this fall under timely filing because it's almost a year old?" And we paid out a lot of money for it. And so they went back and it prompted a call between their provider relations, the claims department, and our broker. And so they had all three of them on on a call. They didn't include me because I already pointed out the problem. And so the three of them they met, and they didn't understand how this claim processed and auto adjudicated without any hands on it or any actual human eyes on it. And so they had to reprocess the claim, um, and realize that it was processed incorrectly. And so they had to refund that entire amount back to us. And that
Wow.
was simply because I'm watching these claims diligently every week, and watching the amounts and, all of that.
So, for the HR leaders who are listening in or watching our episode that feel like healthcare spend is a black box, what are a few habits you do consistently to stay in front of this?
Well, one, of course, is auditing our claims,
Hmm.
and two is knowing your workforce well enough to know that if there's going to be a large dollar claim, who's going to be how to impact, because you know from December to January, or January to December, you're looking at everything that encompasses for that whole year, all the claims that go from January to December, all the stop loss claims that go in between there, all those things that you've got to keep track of, because in the next year when you try to do renewals, you got to keep track of what was your spend, you know and but at the same time, we're trying to provide the best benefits available to our employees. Now, that can be good, that can be bad.
What would AI need to do for you to say, now it's worth the effort and the change management?
If AI could look through the claims for me,
Hmm.
I know I get a report every annually with our broker that talks about, a majority of your claims are in this area, or the top five of your claims, high dollar claims, are in this area. The top five of your pharmacy are in this area. The top of your dental are this, and the top of your vision are this. And that's great. But I wouldn't mind having something that was giving me a heads up on what to look for before the end of the year. You know what I mean? And I think AI would be a tool that we could use to do something like that.
Hmm. So, if you could pick one low risk AI pilot that saves time without creating chaos, what would it be? Survey theme summaries, a handbook Q&A tool, onboarding support, manager coaching prompts, or is there something else you have in mind?
Well, the survey responses, we have to take it for what it's worth, because we don't know what the feeling was behind the comments that were made, right? It's a black and white, and I think AI has a capability of being able to look one way or another and say, okay, uh that was sarcasm, or whatever, But I mean, we have to read when we're looking through our survey results and trying to find out what works for us and what doesn't. You know, um, like I said, if I had another option of something, another set of eyes that could read that language and say, here's what they really said, versus here's what you think they said.
So let's land with a few takeaways leaders and use immediately. What's one belief about frontline turnover that most leaders, in your opinion, get wrong?
They a lot of our managers here, when they have turnover, and we always hear that employees don't leave employers, they leave managers. And if you're not providing the proper support to your employees, you're not giving them necessary feedback for them to succeed, they don't have the loyalty that you'd like them to have. And so they're walking out the door, and so we're trying to get our supervisors trained up to be able to recognize when an employee is struggling or possibly giving up. What can you do to make that better for them to want to stay? I think in a lot of areas we've addressed that, but there are some of those managers that think that that's a bad employee no matter what, and no matter what I do or say, they're going to leave. That's not always the case.
Wes, if an HR leader inherits a messy operation tomorrow, what are the first three moves you'd recommend to stabilize, rebuild trust, and start producing results quickly?
Wow. And the story of my life. And it depends on the organization, actually, because the first thing you need to do is get to know your people.
Okay.
Get to know your immediate staff, get to know the managers and directors, get to know some of the workforce, and just see where they are, because you're not going to walk in the door and somebody's going to trust you immediately, because you build trust off of building relationships, and as long as people know that you think you know what you're talking about, they're going to start trusting you. I mean, it took us, what, 2.5 years to build the trust that we have here with the workforce. And I don't want to say this was a messy operation, but there were some messy things that we needed to clean up. So, people first, of course, is always going to be something that we need to do first. And then you start looking organizationally, your budgets, your compensation, your performance management. I mean, all those things that tie in, because like I said, we've done like 10 plus things here to change the turnover rate, and so once we learned who our employees were, where they come from and stuff like that, then we were able to start working on other things.
Sounds like you've done a really great job of giving your employees a voice and helping them to realize they are heard. Wes, believe it or not, we're actually at the end of our conversation, but I have
Wow.
thoroughly enjoyed it.
Thank
I
you.
want
I
to
did
thank
too.
you so much for sharing your story with us and the real playbook behind your results. And to everyone listening, if you got value from this episode, please follow Navigating AI with Rich Wilson and share it with a leader who's trying to improve retention, build better systems, and scale what works. Once again, Wes, thanks for being here.
Thank you so much.
Mission accomplished. This is Navigating AI. Subscribe for more insights into how AI is transforming business, leadership, and the world. Until next time, stay curious, stay ahead.